Good afternoon. We're here interviewing the great cornetist and composer Nat Adderley as part of Hamilton Jazz Archives. And welcome, Nat.
Hey, I'm very happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Of course, at my age, I'm very happy to be anywhere.
Nat's known for his sense of humor, of course, along with his great tunes. I want to start in a little bit different tack today because we've been starting maybe from the beginnings of people, but I want to ask you about the tunes you write, because these are things that we're going to have our students listen to, and where those tunes come from, and how you feel about your own compositions, because I feel that's a real important contribution to jazz music.
I think that sometimes people generally, even people who are fringe jazz people, that is, writers and critics, for want of a better word, don't really understand that we don't just put some notes on the paper as vehicles for improvisation. Mm-hmm. That there has to be some kind of stimulus in order for you to write something. I know it does for me. Now, I have done songs on the spur of the moment that are not particularly extraordinary, one way or the other, that were done because we were on a record date or because we needed a mm-hmm. certain kind of song. But generally, like my most famous song, the work song, is a song that was based on when I was a child. They were paving the street in front of my house in Tallahassee, Florida. There was the penal system was the chain gang, and they had the chain gang people paving the street. Well, I was not even in school yet, so I was sitting and watching these do, and they fascinated me, these men, because they sang these songs where there was one guy and then a row of maybe 6 abreast, 2 guys, and there was red clay, very hard, and they had to break this clay so that they could come along and pave the street. It was a major highway between Jacksonville, Florida, and Pensacola. Tallahassee is right in the middle. Well, when these guys, the guy in front would hit, boom, and when he'd drop his hammer on the thing, he'd sing something, da 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 da, and then everybody else would hit, boom, and they'd answer, do da 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 da, and it kept repeating, and I was sitting there fascinated. Just, I loved it, and I never forgot it.
You held that until...
Sure, because I used to, as I went along, now and then when I was humming something, I just hum a question and answer thing and remember that. I also remembered it because I went in the house and made lemonade for these guys who were doing that. My mother would come home from school. She was an elementary school teacher. My mother came home and said, where are all my lemons and the sugar? The sugar was expensive. And I said, well, I was giving those guys, the guys out front. And I liked the guys, and they'd let me talk to them, and they all seemed to like me. And Mama said, listen, those guys out there because they did something wrong. Well, I couldn't grasp that too well. They still seemed to. So I went on. I got a couple of spankings about that. Yeah. In my house, spankings they became a bit violent, spanking. But the point is later on, when someone asked me for a song, as a matter of fact, I'll go on and tell it exactly like it was. Bass player named Keeter Betts plays with
We've heard his
Ella
name a few
Fitzgerald.
times today.
Keeter was getting ready to do a record date. We were now professional musicians, Cannonball and I. And Keeter said, why don't you write one of those songs for me? And I went to the hotel in Washington, and I was doing the work song. And the more I did it, the more I thought about it, and I liked it. And so I stopped. I finished writing it, and then I wrote another song and decided to give Keeter another song because I had a record date coming up, and I decided I wanted to do that song on my record date. That's one example of where the inspiration for a song comes from. It is perhaps the most poignant example that I could give for the way that I see where the music comes from, where it goes. There are other reasons for others, but that is probably the best one that I could do.
All right. Good story. When a tune like one of my favorite things you wrote, Never Say Yes, that sounded to me, as compared to maybe a tune like Sticks that you wrote, Never Say Yes, I would like that you put a lot of thought into that tune.
Again, there's another reason. Another reason. We were doing a record date with Nancy Wilson. She was, I didn't know at the time, I thought that all the songs were going to be vocals. Cannonball, and the way he would do it is, we always had very talented people. So Cannon made all the arrangements, all the business, and then he came and had a meeting, not even a rehearsal, and just said, listen, you do 2 songs, you do these 2, you do these 2, and I'll do these 2. So it was me, Joe Zawinul, and Cannonball who were the writers that day. And he said, well, you do 2, Joe does 2, and these others, we already had little arrangements to do. So when I went to do the 2 that I was to do, I thought I was writing a song that, to me, had elements of Broadway song style, of that kind of like da dee 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 da dee 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 doo da 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 da. In other words, not jazz, not for a great that's jazz, but it was sort of melodic, and that's what I was gunning for. When it came the next day, I found out we started recording the next day, and the next day, that's when I found out that we were not doing, she was not singing it, we were playing it. I had to quickly play the melody myself because I had not done an arrangement that had band thing, and that was the reason for that one. But there are many, many stories to go along with. In other words, as far as I'm concerned, most of the music that I have ever written there's a reason for it to be the way that it is. Now you've got 2. If you got another one, speak up.
Hummin.
Hummin, actually, wow.
And then I'll let somebody else talk.
You pick a Hummin. Boy, well, I guess the only way to do it is to tell you the way it really was. Hummin was written about an old woman who lived on my street when I was a little boy again in Tallahassee. Miss Sally was her name. Miss Sally. Said the Southern people have strange ways of saying things, but there was Mrs. Coleman lived there, Mrs. Laster lived up the street, Mr. Laster. Miss Sally was about 80 years old, but she was Miss Sally. There was no man there. She was a tall black woman, and I describe it, she looked like they looked in Roots. like the lady looked at, she wore that long dress as long as an evening gown, and she wore an apron, and the apron was as long as the dress. And Miss Sally must have been about 6 feet tall. She was tall, African-looking black woman. And Miss Sally sat in this rocking chair on her porch. And her front porch was, of course, the houses were little board, wooden houses. She sat in this rocking chair on the front porch, and she had a loose board on that porch. And that's where she had the rocking chair. And Miss Sally would sit there and rock. And like, for example, shelling peas. You take the peas out the shell. She'd take the peas out the shell, drop the peas in the pot that she was holding in her lap, and the hulls in the apron behind the pot. Now and then, she'd move the pot and dump the shells on a piece of paper on the floor, and then go back to shelling peas. Meanwhile, she would rock. And on that loose board, when she'd rock forward, the board would hit boom. When she'd rock backwards, the board would hit from the front and rear, boom. So she would be rocking boom, 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 boom. All us little boys used to come by. We used to like to, because Miss Sally was a bit eccentric. At least I know now that she's eccentric. We just thought Miss Sally was crazy. But after I went to college, I learned that there was such a word as eccentricity. Now, once we keep this, she'd keep this stuff going. We said, Miss Sally, you want to fix that board? Miss Sally said, get the hell out. So we'd leave. Now, years later, when I was thinking about that again, I wrote this song. Oh, I left out a part. Miss Sally used to hum little churchy sounding thing. So it was just kind of gospel sound.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, boom, boom, boom. So I wrote the song. A little later on, and this is the addendum to it. I was living in New Jersey and had this big house, and my mother was visiting. And my mother came downstairs one morning, and she had been listening to radio at night. And my mama said, listen, why don't you write a song that's got some meaning, like Stardust? She said, you and your brother write them little idly-boobly songs, and they don't have no meaning. I had just done. I said, you know that song I got called Hummin'? New one? Said, yeah. Said, you know, Quincy Jones recorded it, Cannonball recorded it, I recorded it. Said, you know that song is about old Miss Sally. She said, what? I said, you know, the rhythm represents that board hitting.
Oh,
boom,
that's great.
boom, boom. And the melody is something like them old gospel sounding thing. And Mama said, yeah, kind of skeptically, yeah, sure. But that night we were working down in the village at the place called the Village Gate. Mama came down that night. We played Hummin'. Mama, she called me over the table. Hey, come here, boy. She said, you know, I listened to that song, and now that you told me what it means, said I could just see that old woman sitting on the porch and the board hitting. Said, you know, old Miss Sally said she's been dead about 15 years now. Said, but we all remember that old board hitting and stuff. She said, now that I see that, you know, and now that I said I'm going to get off your case. That's when I knew Mama was hip. She said, you're going to get off my case. She said, I'm going to get off your case, and I'm going to let you go say, I agree, your songs have meaning.
All right.
And that is the one for that one. Now, I gave you 3 examples. Let's get somewhere else.
That's precious. I wanted to ask you about just your tone and why you chose the cornet. Tell us about that.
We were, again, the little boys. my father bought Cannonball, Sears trumpet, Sears Roebuck trumpet, because my father played cornet, but now trumpet was becoming the popular instrument. Cornet was relegated to a bunch of older men who played another style of jazz. We were just little boys. Cannonball was very talented, and Cannonball got the trumpet, and he was a very good trumpet player. And we had this little band, the guys. I was not in the band. Cannonball was in the band and started out all the little boys. Cannon was about 10 years old. And he started teaching me to play the trumpet because he wanted to switch to alto saxophone, and he didn't want Pop to be disappointed that neither one of us were playing the instrument that he bought or the instrument that he played. So he started teaching me to play the trumpet while he went to alto saxophone. By then, the little band was working, playing after football games and stuff, and he got the money together and got him an alto sax and started teaching me to play trumpet. I played trumpet, but in the early years, somebody stole my trumpet one day. I hid the trumpet in the auditorium while I was going to class, came back and my trumpet was gone. And I had to go play a gig that night. By now, I was playing in the band. I was about 8 years old, to maybe 9.
Wow.
And when I went to the school, the only place that I could go, because the school had some instruments that you could check out. Well, they had no trumpets because the trumpet had become a popular instrument. But there were a couple of old cornets there. And they let me have a cornet, and I took it to work that night and played it, and it played well. But the next day when I went to concert band rehearsal, then that's when I found out the trumpet parts that we were all playing trumpet were all ruffles and flourishes. But the cornets had a different part. They had the melody line. Do dee da 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 do 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 was the cornet part. Soon as I played that part, then I saw the girls were looking at me.
Uh-oh.
And I said, whoa, cancel the trumpet. I'm the cornet player. And that's how I got to cornet. Once, and after a while, in all seriousness, it became very obvious to me that I seemed to be more suited to the cornet than trumpet. For a long time in the early years in New York, I used to play trumpet when we were doing big band records. And I was sitting in a trumpet section. I'd play trumpet as long as I was playing the music. But when it was time for my solo, I put that down and pick up my cornet to play my solo. Then I found out that you couldn't tell the difference in the sound on a record. The cornet sounded just like a trumpet when you wanted to. Sound like a flugelhorn when you wanted to. Sound like a cornet when you wanted to. So I said, why bother? So I never messed around too much. I tried flugelhorn for a minute and found I could do that on cornet too. So
Great.
So I stayed with cornet.
When you were with the quintet and with Cannonball, did you have a sense of? It seems to me you guys were in on the what later was called soul jazz, or you were creating something that was pretty new. Did you have a sense that you were doing that, or was it just coming naturally? You were combining it with the gospel feel and everything else.
Yeah, that's strange too, because we're Episcopalians. I felt when I analyzed things a while back that we were very, very fortunate. We live in a small southern town. We belong to the Episcopal Church with its sort of Gregorian chantish kind of music. for the benefit of the music people, it's all tonic and sixth. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. That's tonic and sixth. And but we lived in a town that was a university town, which means that we got to study in the true classical tradition because we went to the demonstration school for Florida A&M College. And it meant that we got to hear people like Paul Robeson, and I remember Marian Anderson gave concerts. We got to hear this music, this different music. We also got to see, when I was a kid, I saw Jimmy Lunsford's band because they came to Florida A&M to play once.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to, that's another thing. However, across the street from our house, the Episcopal Church was around the corner, but across the street was the Tabernacle Baptist Church, which was a sanctified church. And at Tabernacle Baptist Church, while we had the organ and the European Gregorian style music, the Tabernacle Baptist Church had a band. They had a one-leg drummer and a piano player, and a guy played guitar and a trombone. And they would open up, people, they had some tambourines and hand clappers. And that music was so fascinating that we'd leave our church, because the Episcopal Church would finish like 12 o'clock. We were through. They just getting into it at 12 o'clock. We'd come home, and then Cannonball and I would go stand across the street from the Tabernacle Baptist Church and check out that music, because they were in there talking about, oh, get it. And it was great. We also, I figured out, in order for us to walk to school, we had to walk past what was called the block. It was the one place where the black businesses were. Just one block in Tallahassee. And in that block there was a barber shop and a pool hall and a juke joint, various things. But when we come home from school and walking past it, the jukeboxes were running. And then you get to hear T-Bone Walker and the Blues Boys. And when you mix all that up, you got the Tabernacle Baptist Church, you got the Gregorian chants, you got the symphony orchestras, you got the opera singers, and you got the block. Well, you mix all that up, put it all together, and it forms your musical background. As a result, when you play, all of it comes out. Not just the symphony orchestra, not just Cab Calloway's band, but there's also B.B. King in there, and there's also the Tabernacle Baptist Church. Soul jazz is a word. They made the word. We were just playing our background.
Same thing with
That's
Bob.
all.
Right.
That's all.
Right.
That's all it is. So, although I don't remember exactly how you worded your question, that's the answer.
Yeah.
You know, the thing I was going to ask you about, because everything you've talked about so far has come from this place of authenticity, which I feel is so beautiful. And I feel like oftentimes that gets overlooked in music schools. For instance, sometimes you go to a music school, you want to study composition. Nobody asks you how you feel about anything. They just say, write a sonata. You know what I mean? But it's not, for me, I don't think it's good enough to have just technical expertise. The songs have to have meaning. And you have that. Could you give us your definition or your insights on what you would call music from oral culture as opposed to literate culture?
Boy, strong one. Well, let me go back to the way you started. In a true sense, if you are an instrumentalist in this society, the only method for learning to play an instrument is in the European classical tradition. There's no jazz method. There's no blues method. In other words, to play trumpet, I must learn in the European classical tradition because that is the only method for learning to play a trumpet or a saxophone or a trombone. These are all European instruments. And because it has been analyzed and notated, even if you wanted to just play a rhythm instrument, if you want to play drums, you still have to learn the drums in the European classical tradition if that is the way you're going to learn. Of course, there have been great jazz players who never learned to read music and did not learn in the same European classical tradition, but the music is not all African or all anything. This music is all encompassing, so that by now it would be very difficult, extremely difficult, for a great player to not be able to read music today. The music is too difficult. It has become far beyond something you can just sit and play. Now, the further on in your question, what happens is that one can have his own ideas about what to do about the music, but if you're going to notate it, then you have to notate it using notes that people can understand. You can't have your own system that nobody understands but you. So if you have studied in the European tradition, then of course the notes, the music, will be written in the European tradition. When you get beyond the European tradition, we used to talk about in our seminars, I still will mention it occasionally when it comes up. There are rhythmic patterns from Africa that we have no notations for. There's no way that they got split beats, and we don't have notes that have. There's no symbol for a split beat. Even if there were a symbol for a split beat, we don't know how to split it. It's like the atom bomb. We don't know how to split the atom. So we can only go so far with native African music. We can go a lot further with European music. We can go there because we understand how it works. And there are no split beats to confuse us. There are harmonic patterns, and we study the harmonic patterns, but they are studyable. Split beats are unstudyable. So that what we end up with is, in a sense, some people so far are stifled because they can't get across what they want to musically because there's no way to do it. But I'm sure that there's some brilliant young people now who are working on it, and sooner or later it's going to happen, and there's going to be a whole new world of music to open for us. And when it does, I would venture to say there are also going to be some harmonics that we've never heard of yet that will come out. Music will survive, it will grow, and jazz will continue. And fortunately, I believe that in many cases, young jazz players will lead the way. I don't remember how you worded your question either, but that's it.
That's the answer.
Oh, how's your son doing?
My son, I'm very proud of. I feel very fortunate because in these days and time, it is very difficult to have children who have never been a problem for you.
Mm.
In fact, I have a T-shirt that says, "Live long enough to be a problem for your kids." My son says, "You already have."
Yeah.
But my son is
Good.
doing really great. Of course, he's a pianist and an arranger and a composer,
Right.
and he's wealthy.
Good.
And
I remember he wrote, like, when he was like 11 or something, he had done a tune on
yes,
one of your records.
he did a tune on Cannonball's record, and he listened to that later on. Now that he has studied it,
Mm-hmm.
and he's been to Juilliard in Manhattan, and he's a graduate of Yale University. He said, "You know, I listen to that now, and I think, say, my uncle must have loved me to record that song." I said, "Man, it was a good song."
Yeah.
Said it wasn't great. I mean, you were no monk, but it was a good song.
Yeah.
You know, that he didn't just do it because of that. He did it because he was proud of you too.
Right. Right.
And of course now, I see things and I hear things and say, I think boy knows some music.
Wow.
He does. He's a fine player.
That's great.
You know, I wanted to ask you, in some of the things, and Jimmy Cobb alluded to this, which I thought was great. He said you have a way, when you announce a song, of engaging an audience and pulling them into that song and making them want to hear what's going on inside that song. And also sometimes you have a way of mixing it with humor. Tell us about how humor is a part of jazz.
Sometimes, well, again, I'll go back. When Cannonball and I came to New York in the mid-50s, the popular jazz of the day was West Coast jazz, which was cool. It was very cool.
Mm.
Nobody announced the songs or anything. Everybody stood up and they were very cool, and nobody, you wouldn't dare snap your fingers or have any animation because that was not cool. We didn't know that it was supposed to be taboo. We knew that people weren't doing it, but in Florida, when we played, if you thought it was good, you'd say, "Hey, baby, yeah." Well, the cool people didn't do that, you just stood there and said, So, eventually, Cannon became the kind of leader. First of all, he was a very gregarious man, and Cannonball was a student of the English language. My father was an English teacher, and Cannon was very impressed by him and by the man who was our original teacher, a man named Kirksey, who was a master of the English language. And Cannon knew all these words, and he would announce the songs, and then he talked about the songs so that when you played the song, the people knew what they were listening for. That's when I learned, when I never thought I'd have a band, but I knew that if I ever did get a band, I'm going to explain my music. I'm going to talk about my music. And of course, I'm ignorant, so I tell a lot of jokes too. So it comes out that way. But it is a way of having people have a better feeling about what it is you're doing. There isn't very much that I can say about Body and Soul. It is Body and Soul. It has been done many, many times. But if I know something about that song that the general audience doesn't know, and I can tell them, then when Antonio plays it, they'll understand it better.
Yeah.
Or
Right.
they'll have a better feeling about it.
Right. All right. You play a lot still, and you like, what kind of places do you like playing these cruises? And
Boy, I think this is the best time now. This is the best time. We play more, of course, we play more in Europe and Japan and outside of the country than we do in the contiguous 48 states. But we make more money. The audiences are far more erudite than stateside audiences are generally. And we don't have to work all the time anymore. And you know, what could be better than riding around on a ship playing 4 or 5 times? This is great.
Yeah.
You know. And then we get paid well. You know, I live in Florida. My life is a lot different than when I was in New York and
Yeah.
hustled. And, you know, I got the swimming pool and I live on a lake. I can fish, and when I'm home, I'm swimming. And
Great.
then when I want to write a song now, I just go and sit out on my dock and I feel great about it. I'm not rich, but I'm in a lot better shape now. Life is not bad for jazz players now. Of course, we are working on improving the situation in our own country. Jazz is not accepted as it should be, and there are not great numbers of jazz fans out clamoring for our thing. They're clamoring for the Rolling Stones or the mouse that ate Pittsburgh. But whatever else there is, we are working on it. I think we're getting better. There are an awful lot of young jazz players who are amazing. And I feel great about what I think the future holds for the music. And at the same time, I feel wonderful about the respect that the young musicians seem to have for those of us who've been around a while now.
Yeah.
And we can still go and play, and you still have that thrill. And still, when I play, I go to play, I learn something every night. And it makes life worthwhile. And I hear another way to approach something and say, oh, yeah, that'll work. And you can bet your bottom dollar tomorrow I'm going to do it, because
Right.
it'll enhance what's happening.
Great.
And there are things like this, that there is a college. It's in New York State, right?
Yes.
There's a college in New York State that at least somebody who is granting something feels that it is important enough. Of course you had to convince somebody, but at least it's a step forward.
Right.
There's something going on. I admire people who are able to do that, and I feel good about the universities being involved.
Great.
You know, I would like to say something about that, and this is important too, that, you know, if you walk into a conservatory of music in any major city in the United States, go down to the score library, you can pick off the shelf the complete works of J.S. Bach, complete works of W.A. Mozart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if there's a piece of European classical symphonic music, you can go to any major city in the United States of America and find a symphony orchestra, repertory orchestra, that should be able to play that piece of music. And, you know, jazz having begun in the United States, I feel that, you know, I should be able to walk into any city in the United States of America and just find myself a quintet that can play jive samba.
Well,
That should be standard repertoire. That's what I'm saying.
I got a theory. This is going to take a bit, so I don't often even, expound on this
Here's your
particular
chance.
case. My major was sociology, not music. Music was my minor. I've been an amateur sociologist all the time. When I look at the jazz scene as opposed to the classical scene, as opposed to the rock pop scene, what I see sociologically is this. When you have a society that does not accept a people, how can we expect that same society to accept the cultural contributions of that people? I believe that the reason we have a lack of regard for the cultural contribution of black people is because you have never accepted the people. As long as black people are second and third class citizens, then the contributions are going to be relegated to second and third class status. So what happens is that over a period of time you begin to have integration. And when you have integration, then you have a mixing of the people. When the people mix, the contributions mix. And you have a different kind of cultural contribution coming because it has come from a different source. So that to wind it up, then I believe that, in fact I know, there has never been the word escapes me, there has never been a major contributor is not the word I want, because there have been major contributors. There has never been a white person who has changed the direction of jazz music. All of the innovations have been by black people. There have been great white players. That's why it gets confusing to try to say this. There are great white players. So there is Stan Getz. There was Stan Getz. But were it not for Lester Young, there would have been no Stan Getz. There are other great white players that would not have, but there was always a black player. There's always a Charlie Parker and a Dizzy Gillespie. There's always a Louis Armstrong and a Jelly Roll Morton. And these people. So in the end, what my point is that I believe that we are now in the generation where we're going to have our first great white innovator, because we are getting together. We're living together. We don't have closed communities. We still have them, but we have many communities that have opened up. So the idea is a young white boy who grows up with a young black boy, and they live in this multicultural community, they're going to produce some multicultural music that we've never heard before.
Let me come in on this and ask you a question, because this is exciting for me. Do you then think that if we have a great white innovator, and that person is sensitive to the contributions of African Americans, that he will then be able to establish a beachhead to get people to respect this music the way that it should be?
The music will gain its own respect over a period of time. It won't be because of him. It will be because of the music itself. And your point is well taken, though, because the acceptance for the music from many people will be because they accept the man. So that makes a major difference in the way you see it. I believe that it is a part of, it's going to be a part of American folklore, that the music stayed in this vein because we had, when we had only, if we could only live in this 8-block area and it was closed, then all of our contributions stayed right in that 8-block area. And the music that came out of there was from that 8-block area. And people outside of that 8-block area had to study it to try to figure out what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But now we got a 16-block area, and 8 blocks of the 16 blocks is mixed.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're working on some other stuff now.
Great.
You know, I only said that to say this. There are things that we've been trying to get changed since 1619, and ain't nobody been listening.
Right.
Maybe if somebody else said, maybe we just hush and fold our hands, let somebody else say it. You know? It's like, for instance, I tell people, there's no, Martin and Malcolm have already said it can't be said any more eloquently. You know, I said, you want to hear it again? You want me to push rewind?
There, it will be stated in another fashion by someone who grows up in this multicultural community a little later on. It will be stated, if not as eloquently, certainly it will, but it'll hit home, and it'll come from a source that is more acceptable than Martin or Malcolm.
Some great thoughts, Nat. Great
All of my thoughts. Is it time for dinner?